Okay, it looks like we got about 33 people online, which I'm really excited to see everyone. Some folks here, we got some questions coming in around in-person events and also around what am I concerned about? We'll get to that. I've got a lot of concerns, but I've also got a lot of ideas around how to make this, if not a fun experience, at least an interesting skill building experience. All right, so it's about 5 minutes past the hour. I'm going to go ahead and start. So a little bit of intro about who I am and what we do here at Oak and Reads. I'm the founder and CEO of Oak and Reads, which is an interactive training consultancy where we deliver workshops on communication, collaboration skills for all of our clients. Now, the cool thing about Oak and Reads is we do a lot of in-person workshops and we do a lot of virtual trainings, much like we're doing right now on this webinar. I quite literally just got off of a 3-hour virtual manager skills training that I was teaching for a globally dispersed group. Did it at 8 a.m. Pacific, so the folks in Germany could also dial in. We talked about coaching and feedback skills, a lot of really good, juicy, helpful manager skills that around manager fundamentals. So obviously this is a free webinar, so I got to plug my own stuff. And so if you are interested in having a virtual webinar on skill building, we can make it interactive and we do this all the time. So this webinar is sponsored by Oak and Reads because that's my business. But also we work with a lot of different companies around the globe. So regardless of what your company is working on, if you need help in virtual collaboration like today, or if you need help interviewing candidates, preparing interviewing templates, or even public speaking and team collaboration workshops. We work with all sorts of different companies around the world in a variety of industries on these really critical communication and collaboration skills. So what are we doing today? What's the point of this webinar? Why did we put this together so quickly? I wanted to give a lot of tips and tricks on how to set yourself up for extended virtual working. So how do you set up your home? How do you set up your daily habits? And how do you set your mind to something where you're going to be a lot more alone? You're not going to be with your colleagues in the normal way. You're going to be working from a new place. And we're also not sure how long this is going to last, right? So we're going to kind of think about a mindset around how do we set ourselves up to work for an extended period of time from home. I'm going to talk a little bit about techniques for virtual collaboration from a portion of my virtual collaboration skills workshop. How do you talk to your teams about expectations? How do you talk to your teams about setting norms? And how do you use tools like Zoom? I'm going to give you some tips more effectively to make it more interactive. And finally, the last thing, which I think is on a lot of people's minds, and I'm seeing a lot of these questions come through, which is great, is how do you maintain focus and avoid burnout when you're solo working from home? And how do you set those work-life boundaries to make sure that, you know, if you're working in the same place where you live and eat and cook and sleep and hang out with friends, how do you set that boundary just so it doesn't feel like you're both always at work and always at home? How do you make that clean break? So we're going to talk about some techniques there. Cool. So I want to step back a little bit and give a little context because virtual working is something that a lot of people don't quite know some of the origins around. And I think it's actually really interesting to go back to the year 2010, where there was a huge snowstorm, snowpocalypse happened in Washington, D.C. Now, I'm from Boston. We're used to snow. We're tough guys about it. But Washington, D.C., not particularly prepared for snow that year. And the whole city basically shut down. And after that 2010 snowpocalypse, there was actually a federal bill signed called the Telework Act, which forced federal agencies to start to put together what they called teleworking programs. And it's basically remote work programs, but the federal government calls it telework. And what's cool about this, and cool to me, I'm a remote working, nerd, let's say. I worked on that program in my first job out of college when I worked for DGW and AECOM as a remote work designer. And we worked with the GSA, which is the General Services Administration, to basically put in place guidelines for how to prepare and train, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of federal workers on how to work remotely. And I think it's kind of fascinating that a real push came from the federal government, which really isn't typically on the forefront of workplace innovation. But the GSA did a lot of really interesting work almost a decade ago on setting people up to deal with emergencies, but also to deal with a lot of other things that remote work can help with. So they put together this GSA recipe book, which you can Google and go online. It has absolutely hilarious clip arts with this 3D chef who's working from home, which I have a lot of questions about in general. But one thing that's really useful is this GSA recipe book is something that you can take yourself and adapt for your own companies, because there's a lot of free resources there. And again, federal government resources, but they're actually pretty good and pretty prescient. Another thing I found that was interesting about this GSA recipe book is the reasons why, the reasons behind why do we work from home. And 10 years ago, talking about workplace flexibility, talking about forward thinkers and using this as a recruitment tool, and talking about flexibility in work as a way to promote team collaboration and effectiveness, right? Oftentimes we don't think about remote work as something that can promote effectiveness, almost as a hindrance. But this was designed to give people extra options, which would then encourage people to find new ways of solving problems. Another benefit the GSA talked about with remote work is creating innovative government, right? So supporting customer solutions and understanding how this technology would help people work from different places, would help them do their jobs better. And even remote work as a way to improve employee performance, right? So making sure that this, I love this quote here, today's work is different. There's less need to be watched and more need to be connected. And so we want to think about, especially for managing teams, if we're a manager that struggles with this idea of I need to manage to butts and seats, right? If I can't see my people, I can't manage them. We need to start to break that habit right away, because that not only is going to affect us right now in this remote working environment, but it's something where we need to think about how are we actually measuring performance? We're not going to get into all that, but these are kind of the big questions that remote work forces upon us. And they're big questions I'm going to hopefully give you some frameworks for answering some of them today. So here's what we're going to cover. Talk about setting up our home work habits. Then we're going to talk about virtual collaboration tools. And then I'm going to talk about setting boundaries. And then I'll spend as much time as we need answering Q&A. These first 3 modules, hopefully will take about 20 minutes. I don't want to take up all of your lunch break, but I've packed in a lot of ideas that I think hopefully you can start to apply right away. So setting up your home office, how do we create a happy and healthy home working environment? The first thing comes to mindset. And this is something I think a lot of us struggle with. You got to think of this as going to the office, right? You got to ditch the couch. It's okay to work from the couch if you are working from home, on a random Friday afternoon before a 3-day weekend, right? It's okay to check emails from bed if you know that you're going to be heading into the office later. But the problem is if you make that your primary working environment, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So the first step is you need a dedicated place for working, right? I am working from my home office, but I live in a 1-bedroom in Oakland, right? So it's not like I have a room with a door that I close, but I have a corner that is just for work. So I feel like I'm in my office. And when I'm looking ahead, I've created a view that feels office-like. That's going to help later when we talk about making that clean break from working to being at home. One thing that's really important, this is something we worked on a lot with when I was doing workplace strategy, is create visual separation. What you see when you look up from your computer is really important, and it's really important for maintaining focus. So I have in front of me a wall with my first ever paycheck, which is actually we'll talk about that later, a diploma. And then also what I have, I took a photo of it, and here on the side, I just printed out the slide that has all my clients. And I also printed out basically my menu of services. Now, this is pretty janky, right? But just looking around, it's a visual reminder of what it is that I do. And so that's around personalizing it. And thinking about when I look around, does it remind me of what I do? This is something I think is really important in any office. Offices like to put up photos of clients or pictures of outputs, especially if you're a technology company, if you don't have something tangible necessarily. Walking around the office, does it remind me of what I do? Try to recreate that in your home office. It sounds a little corny, but it can be a little bit of a motivator. So you're not looking up and seeing your TV and going, oh, well, maybe I should watch that DVR of The Bachelor again, right? Those are little things that'll help keep you focused and in line. Another thing is just setting up your actual physical work environment at your dedicated workspace. So whether you're setting aside a portion of a table or a piece of a counter, whatever is going to be your dedicated workspace. If it's on your desk at work, you need it there, right? If scissors, pens, paper, notebook, You don't want to have to go scrambling around, especially if you're on a call. It doesn't have to be a ton of stuff, but think chargers, think phone chargers, think whatever those things are that you're using all the time. Just get a second version of them and put them in that dedicated workspace. It'll remind you more, again, that you're at work rather than at home. Another thing around mindset is creating your own structure, right? So what we think is it's one real big benefit is around reclaiming your commute time. So this is actually a really big benefit of remote work. And there's research that shows, and this was something we used to do to kind of pitch people and management on why remote work is really valuable. In general, the time spent commuting goes back 50-50, 50% to the employee and 50% for the company. So remote work generally means you're going to work a little bit more, but you're not spending as much time commuting. Now, also half of that time goes back to you as an employee. So it's not as if that time is disappearing, but you can reclaim some of that to do what you want, right? Take a little extra time to prepare breakfast or to exercise or to read a book or do some casual reading. Like there's more time you're going to have. So you're going to have to add some structure around that. Design your breaks and design your timing of your day. Something I do is I block out chunks of time during the day to work on certain things, because when I'm working from home, I don't have the normal cadence of other people around me reminding me, oh, it's time to go to lunch, or, oh, hey, Dave, come with me, we're going to our team meeting. You have to create those interruptions and design them yourself. Don't forget to take actual scheduled breaks. This is a huge thing people forget to do. Carve out 30 minutes in your calendar for eating. Carve out 30 minutes for taking a walk and disconnecting. You will find yourself not taking those normal breaks because there's no one there to prompt you. You got to schedule those. This is also an opportunity to test new routines. So I think one thing that's really important, obviously, is exercise, but exercise during the day, right? You don't have to be at the office. What's available in your neighborhood, right? Go for a walk, go for a run, do it at 3 o'clock when normally you would just drink more coffee. Thinking about, you can make your own lunch, right? That could be part of your routine. I love doing that when I'm working from home. It gets me away from the computer, gets me away from a screen. It's something I like doing. You can build that into your normal workday now. And also pets, take the dog for a walk, go hold the cat on a meeting, right? These are also something you're gonna have to figure out a plan for, because the dog barking in the background is going to be a constant thing. So figuring out a strategy for that is important, but also you get the opportunity to make a new routine there. There are probably 100 other things that are part of your routine, your daily routine. The critical thing is come up with what that new morning or afternoon or evening routine is. It's going to be different, but you need to be strategic about that. And it's going to be weird at first. So experiment, try something new, learn from it, and go on and try something different. Another thing about a home office setup is ergonomics, right? You're going to have to do this yourself. So I've got this little, picture of this woman at a desk. Now, a couple things you want to think about with ergonomics. It all starts with your posture at your home dedicated workspace. So this is why working from the couch is really going to be a killer over time, because you're going to have bad ergonomics if you're sitting on a couch or if you're in bed. So you just want to sit up, right? Normal, good posture, sit up, back straight, tighten your core if you can. Always try to get your feet on the ground. 2 feet on the ground, again, helps support your lower back, helps make sure you're standing up straight. One thing that's to set up that I think is important is ideally you'll have a second monitor in your dedicated workspace. You might not have it today, but you should look to try to get one. When you're setting up your dedicated monitor, what you want to be, just like is in this photo, you want the top of your eyes when you're standing up straight to basically look a little bit down to the top of your monitor. You don't want to be looking up. You also don't want to be looking all the way down. If you shoot a straight laser beam out from your eyes and slightly go down, that should be the top of your monitor, just like in this image. Shoulders down, relax, try to get away from this tension. And when you're thinking about how far to sit from your desk, right, you just want to think about keeping your arms at a little bit of a more than a 90-degree angle, maybe a 100-degree angle. 90-degree angle is ideal, but sometimes it's hard to set up. But just kind of a right angle with your arms. That'll make sure you're not stretching out your hand. and that can hurt your shoulder over time. Again, this is why having a desk with a chair, really, really important. So things to add to your shopping list. If you don't have any of these things, external monitor, ideally with a monitor arm, that saves a ton of space on your desk and you can move it around. Get a mouse, right? If you're just gonna spend the whole day on your trackpad, that's really gonna mess up your elbow over time. So get a mouse. If you have one at work, you should have one at home. Bonus charging cords. You don't wanna have to be unplugging and plugging everything in. Get a second cord for your computer, get a second cord for your phone, all that kind of stuff. Get a chair, ideally an office chair, but if not, get a normal chair so that you can sit properly. And ideally some sort of thing for your papers. I'm going to talk about that next in sort of a junk zone, but really important to have some place to put this stuff so it doesn't overwhelm your working area. This is what I'm looking at right now. It's kind of weird. I'm looking at a photo of the setup I'm using right now, but you can see I've got a laptop, I've got a second monitor, I've got a mouse, I've got charge cords, I've got this weird little like car thing that I use to keep myself paying attention, and of course the can of seltzer. So a couple things to keep in mind. Be realistic with your home office setup. Don't beat yourself up if it's not perfect. The first thing I think that is really critical, create a junk zone. That's what is going on with this little thing with my wallet on it, and I put some receipts and my earbuds and a couple books. You don't want to be, if you're not going to be perfectly organized all the time, that's normal. Just have a place where you can just dump stuff so it doesn't start to take over your home work zone. Because most of us probably work in apartments. We don't have a huge amount of space. You want a place to condense some of that junk so it doesn't overwhelm you. Here's another thing. I call it designing your distractions. You want to be honest with yourself that you're going to spend some portion of the day on Instagram scrolling, right? You're going to spend some time reading the news, especially now. Build that time into your breaks, because what will happen is what's called tech loops, where we all do this. We open our phone, we go to social media, we start scrolling, we go to whatever our other website is, we go to this other website, we check our fantasy sports, whatever it is, and all of a sudden we look up and 20 minutes have gone by and we don't know what happened. So it's hard to catch yourself doing that, but try to think about what are some of those patterns we have when we pick up our phone, and build time in our day to have a break, right? Build some time in to read an article or text a friend, but try not to let those intersperse throughout the whole day, because that's where time just gets sucked up. And all of a sudden we look up, it's 5 o'clock and we haven't really gotten what we want done. I also like to say, don't be afraid of rocking the virtual meeting mullet. And what I mean by that is that's what I'm wearing right now. It's business casual up top, sweatpants down below. It's kind of fun, right? It's actually super comfortable. You would have no idea that I'm wearing sweatpants if I hadn't just told all 50 of you that I was wearing sweatpants. But you can have a new type of business casual. You can look great up here, but you only have to worry about this half. So experiment with that, be comfortable, have fun with it, joke with your teams, right? Be realistic that there's some at-home aspects here too. And don't be afraid to be weird, right? Have a dance party if you finish a document and you want to crank up the Spotify and jump around the room, right? That's a great little break. You normally can't do that in the office. Read stuff out loud to edit them. What would be annoying to someone next to you when you're at your cubicle is actually totally fine when you're by yourself. You're in charge of your own space. So have some fun with that, and design that into your day. Enjoy that. That's one of the exciting things about working from home. All right. So again, I'm going to keep moving here. We got a few more minutes here, which we're right on time. I want to get to plenty of time for questions. I'm seeing a lot of questions, which is awesome. Virtual collaboration tools and techniques. So I talked about setting up your home office. Now let's talk about actually meeting and talking with people online. It's something we do all the time, but there's a lot we can get better at. And I've worked with a lot of clients on kind of designing these expectations. So this is kind of a quick hit of what I do when I typically come in and work with a client on virtual norms. So what we want to think about is, what are our tools we're using? What are the techniques we're using within them? And also, what are the expectations? And how can we talk with our teams about our expectations now that we're going fully remote or almost fully virtual? So it's really important to set norms. The critical thing is we assume everyone uses Slack the same way, or everyone uses Google Hangouts or Zoom the same way. But every communication medium actually has different expectations in different organizations. So basically every communication tool, whether it's instant message or email, has expectations in 3 categories. And you want to decide with your teams, what are your group's expectations across these 3 variables? It's going to save a whole lot of hassle in the end. So speed, how quickly should we expect responses? You know, the speed of a text message is a lot faster typically than the speed of an email, or a Slack message is usually faster than an edit in a shared document, right? That can cause a lot of friction if someone's waiting for a response on Slack and you're offline and you haven't told anyone. So set those expectations. Also detail. This is where a lot of confusion can come. So how dense should this information be? Is this the thing where I get a quick TLDR, right? I Slack someone, hey, give me the context, fill me in 2 sentences. Or is it an email where you can actually believe this is a single source of truth? This is where the data is. You want to make sure the detail, people aren't adding the detail in areas where you're not expecting it, and vice versa. And also accuracy, right? How often is this piece of information updated, and how close to that source of truth is this, right? A single Slack message, I probably wouldn't go to the CEO and say, this is what I heard, just based off of that, versus if we have like a shared wiki that we're constantly updating, but we only do that when the final decision is made, that's a very useful single source of truth that we can believe in. So with your team, you should ask these questions. Now is the time. Probably you should have done it before, but we're here today. Ask yourself these questions. What are the expectations across speed, detail, and accuracy for all of the virtual tools we're using? What are we actually good at using? And what are our weaknesses? You can use a SWOT analysis. I love doing this when we talk about communication tools. What are the strengths for our usage of Slack? What are the weaknesses that we find when we use Slack? What are some of the opportunities or things we could do differently? And then what are the threats? What are the things stopping us from being power users on this tool? And then also choosing which tool to use. I think this is really critical. What are the questions we should ask ourselves before we decide to send a Slack or send an email or post something on the internal wiki, right? What do we use to hold ourselves accountable and use guardrails so we know we can catch ourselves when we're using the wrong tool to send the right message? And finally, for this is be honest with yourself. What do you do for face-to-face? What do we use face-to-face communication for right now? And what are we going to use to replace that? It's probably a lot of things that you use face-to-face for: getting complex questions answered, socializing, coming to complex decisions in a group face-to-face setting. Which of these tools are going to supplant that? Make that decision as a group so you're not assuming this. So here's some examples of norms that may be useful. So like for phone calls, when do we pick up the phone and call someone, right? For complex questions. When do we use Slack or group chat, right? Simple questions. Or to point someone in the direction of where a document is, right? Don't text me, where's that file? Ask me on Slack, and then I can just Slack it to you. Video calls, right? Maybe we use this to replace face-to-face meetings for complex discussions. Or we also now require video calls to make a consensus decision where we hear from everyone. These are probably things you did face-to-face before. Also, I think it's really important. We need a place to socialize with our teams. I would argue video calls like this are great. I actually have a video call with a couple of my friends where we check in once a month and we just have a moment to socialize. It's during work hours, but don't tell them. Don't tell their bosses. Video calls may have to be the only place you see and hear from your teammates. Socializing and building morale is going to be super critical right now. Email, right? Thinking about talking to external partners, customers, maybe that's the tool. You probably already do that right now. Documenting decisions might say, let's keep that on email right now. And then let's talk about the shared wiki, documentation, Confluence, whatever those things are that you use. Maybe it's in Jira. these replace the quick drive-by question and answer. It's the, hey, check the shared document, because that's our single source of truth. There's probably a lot of other tools I missed that your team is using that I'm not aware of. So come up with this list, ask those questions from the previous slide, and formalize what your expectations are here. So when it comes to virtual meetings, it's just like any meeting, but you need to be more explicit. So it's a lot harder to adjust on the fly in a virtual meeting. So I think setting up the expectations ahead of time are even more important. So always send an agenda. The basic agenda for a virtual meeting has the roles of all the participants, what decisions need to be made, and context, like pre-reading or other information that people should come prepared with, so you don't have to talk about it and basically catch people up in the meeting. Roles that you can put, things like facilitator, right? Meeting facilitator, they're running the meeting, a note taker who's documenting this in some shared area, a timekeeper to keep people honest. Again, you don't have to have all these, but I find them to be really helpful. And a decision maker. Identify who is making what decision and who's responsible for ultimately making that decision. It may be consensus, it may be you're convincing one person, but whatever it is, make sure you know who it is so you can, once the decision is made, you move on. Think about content roles you want to assign. Subject matter experts, make sure you have the right ones. I like to add for fun, like a yes and person. This comes from my improv background, but someone whose only job it is in the meeting to push ideas forward, acknowledge and build on them. Not every meeting needs this person, but it's a nice thing, especially in creative meetings or meetings where you need to come up with a new solution. Same with the negative person, the no but person. They're the poke holes in everything person. By assigning this role explicitly, you take some of the pressure off of that person because they know they have to be critical and people won't take it as personally. Wild idea person. Throw out ideas that move the group 10 steps forward instead of 1. Again, this can be productive. It can also be counterproductive. Pick the right one for the right meeting. And the data expert, if there's someone who needs to have specific data expertise or can pull data in the moment, who's good at running queries or has data at their fingertips, that may be a useful role. Last one is the Yoda. This is one of my favorite ones. Is assigning a Yoda is basically the person who takes a 10,000-foot view of the meeting and talks about what are we not talking about. They can talk in the Yoda voice if they want, if you want to really go all out. But I think it's nice to have someone who's kind of set back from the back and forth of the conversation to provide context and ask big questions. All right, quick water break. So when you're in the actual virtual meeting, it's much like a normal meeting, but again, you got to be really explicit because you have less flexibility. So always send the agenda, send whatever pre-reading is available so that the idea is minimize the amount of formal information sharing you're doing in a meeting. Formal information sharing is kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm just talking at you. It's boring when it's in person. It's extra boring when you do it virtually because people will zone out. It's so easy to pull up another window. It's slow. Other people want to go faster. Some people want to go slower. It's a bad medium for sharing in a meeting context. So send out the deck ahead of time if you can. Always assign the roles, obviously, and have this mindset around limiting the number of people on your virtual call. If they don't have a role or they're not responsible for an agenda item, don't bring them. Don't bring them. They can read the notes afterwards. During the meeting, remind people of the rules and roles up front, right? So reminder, set the expectations. Hey, we'd love it if you can turn your Slack notifications off. Make sure you're not checking your email. If you haven't read the pre-reading, please don't be here, right? That's a hard and fast rule if you want to play it that strictly. I think it's really helpful to have a check-in at the beginning of meetings, especially virtual meetings. And now, especially because we're seeing a lot less of each other, the check-in is 3 questions. Have everyone go around and do this. It takes about 7 minutes. And this is going to supplant some of that socializing that we're losing because we're all stuck at home. The check-in is simple. What's one thing personally that's on your mind? What's one thing professionally that's on your mind? and what's your goal for this meeting or conversation? Give everyone 30 seconds each. It's a nice way to just make sure that if there's things going on in the world, one, we acknowledge them. Two, we understand that some people may be distracted, so we can give them a little slack. And three, it's just another thing around generating empathy and building morale, especially in a kind of a scary time where we don't get to see each other, where a lot of us need that in-person interaction to feel welcomed and to feel at home. During the meeting, the whole point is maximizing problem solving, right? Everyone's done the pre-reading, so we should be there to solve and discuss and ask questions. And don't be afraid to cold call on people. One of the great tools about Zoom is that I can see with a little, it's sort of a clock icon, I can see who has the window up and is listening and who has minimized the window and doesn't have it on their screen. So what I love to do in virtual meetings is I just cold call on the people who are showing the little I'm not paying attention icon to make sure that they are. It's kind of like a middle school English teacher trick. And also cold calling reminds everyone that they need to be present and participating. And some people actually need a little bit of coaxing. You don't have all of the same body language tools as you do in an in-person meeting to kind of read the room. But the flip side is people don't feel as obligated to give the body language indications that they are present and listening, because it's hard to make eye contact. You can always basically pause your video. And so you have to actively get the participation. Don't expect people to just jump in. It's a lot harder. And finally, after a virtual meeting, it's even more important to record decisions and actions in a shared document because following up becomes a lot harder because you can't just walk by someone's desk. Have it all in a shared document, send an email, put it in a Slack message, whatever that expectation is. And finally, this goes back to socializing. This is true for any virtual meeting. I like to encourage people to do what's called formalizing the water cooler. So you go from water cool to water cooler. Formalizing the water cooler is basically, we've all been in that virtual meeting where there's some people in the conference room and a couple people dialing in. And after the meeting is over, we go, okay, everyone, we're done. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow. You turn off the conference line. And then a couple people walk out of the room and someone asks, oh, did you talk to so-and-so about that? I was really curious about an update on that client. And all of a sudden there's a second meeting that's happening. None of the people who are online even have a shot at participating because they've logged off, they're on to the next thing and they're not physically there. And there's also a lot that happens after the meeting around just socializing and asking people like, hey, casual questions about what's going on. All of that stuff should be the meeting. So really be diligent about not cramming too much into your agendas. So you have a little extra flex time at the end to formalize some of that open discussion time. It's so tempting to push right to the end of the hour-long mark to get as much done. But what you're doing is you're leaving out some of the really critical aspects of informal collaboration that, again, that in-person informal collaboration, you'll probably realize this when you have that conversation with your team, you're gonna need some substitute for that. So creating open space in your meetings is one of the options you have. And a big question around that is, and this is something I don't have an answer for you, you're gonna have to decide this, how much inefficiency are you gonna tolerate in your meetings to promote informal socializing, right? How much time are you gonna actively build in to allow people to just kind of shoot the shit? Because there's no other option for that normally happening because everyone's stuck at home. That ratio is going to be different for everyone, but it is going to be critical for morale, and it's something you should discuss and come to a consensus or a decision on. So also, when it comes to actually using the tools, I could go into endless rants about using Slack and text messaging and all that, but I figured since we're on Zoom, let me show you some of the things that are useful on Zoom. Again, this is not sponsored by Zoom, but it's a great tool. Participant list tools. You can see on your participant list, basically if you open up, where is it? on your thing, you can see there's like a yes, a no, a go slower, go faster. There's a more button with a thumbs up and a thumbs down. I actually think they may be disabled because this is a webinar and not a typical meeting. But on a standard meeting, you'll see this in the participant list. Just make sure. Yeah. It's useful to talk about whether or not your team wants to use these tools. So it's another way to encourage collaboration where you can get people to agree on a decision by all clicking yes or no. You can have people give feedback on a presentation like, hey, go faster, I'm bored, this is old news, or hey, slow down, I need to hear something. You can also like give applause, just like this, like Slack emojis kind of things. I think it's also helpful to say, hey, I just stepped away for a moment without having to like, hey, interrupt the meeting, I'm leaving, or put it in the chat. It's just another option for that, especially for larger meetings. I think the critical thing is decide if you're going to use these or not. It's frustrating when some people use them and they hope people are paying attention, but other people aren't and the facilitator isn't, so no one's using them. Again, just make a decision. Yeah, we're going to agree that all our decisions are using the yes, no button. We're going to love using the claps, that kind of thing. Just have a conversation about it. Useful settings in Zoom. I think it's helpful to set like mute your mic when joining and mute your video when joining. I've had many situations where I've logged on to a meeting and the person I'm meeting with did not realize that this was a video call and it was not exactly the virtual meeting mullet that they were hoping to present to me. I'll leave it at that. I think it's also helpful to always display participants' name on videos. That's useful for like calling on people and discussing. So again, just makes it a little less frictionless, more frictionless to just see who's online and talk in a normal way. Also use breakout rooms. I love breakout rooms on Zoom, especially for workshops where I get people to break into groups of 2 to 3 to do an exercise. Be creative with using breakout rooms on your own, especially if you want check-ins to save time. You can just have people do a check-in with a group of 3. You can automatically send them into breakout rooms and bring them all back, and it's really seamless. So it's, again, another way to add intimacy into your virtual meetings. So it's not just like 15 faces on a screen. Looking great on video is something we're always concerned about. This is how I usually look on my video calls, kind of looking weird. Zoom has a great feature where you go to preferences and video and it'll touch up your appearance. It actually is almost like putting like TV makeup on your face. And it actually really works. You can see on me when I click that feature, it upgrades me a lot, actually. So I would encourage you to see how much that looking great on video tool can help you. Other things to take note of while you're thinking about just getting your video set up right. Avoid backlighting. As you can see, I have like these nice windows here, but I close all the shades because they're behind me. But the window in front of me is open. Try to have the light coming from the front, right? It's just sort of normal photography. The light should hit you. Don't have it coming from behind you. It makes you really dark and shadowy. Ideally, you want to raise your camera up. I actually have my laptop not as high as I'd like, but I put like a puzzle box underneath my laptop just to raise it up. So you can kind of see this, it looks a lot better as opposed to when you are down below the camera, you're kind of looking down on people. It looks a little creepy and weird. So ideally raise your laptop up, put a bunch of books under it for your calls. You'll just look a lot better. Like, you know, models don't like to be shot from underneath. It's not flattering. And one thing, if you're on a Zoom or even on Hangouts, try to expand the video screen so you can see all the participants simultaneously. It makes it feel a lot more like you're in a meeting. It's sometimes when you have the setting where it just shows one person big all the time, it feels jumpy, and also you can't see if someone's nodding or reacting without sound. It won't jump to that person. And you want to be able to at least have some of your abilities as like with peripheral vision to kind of see nonverbal reactions. That helps you out there. And one thing that I do a lot, I'll just be honest with you, don't just stare at your own face for the whole meeting. It's really tempting to do that. and try, again, by expanding the videos, that helps curb some of that instinct to just look at your own face while you're talking. I don't know what that is, but I talk to a lot of people. People find themselves doing that a lot. So those are just some small tips to feel a little bit more confident looking good on video. So I'm going to wrap things up with my content and get to questions. And I want to end with this idea around staying focused and setting boundaries. We want to be clear about how do we avoid burnout and how do we stay happy, healthy, and optimistic during a time when things are, to be totally frank, kind of weird. So one thing that's really important, set your core work hours and stick to them. What that means is if you're as a team, we're going to be online from 10 to 5, and that's our online time. Or if you're going to shrink those core hours when you expect everyone to be online, that's fine too, but stick to them and don't make this be something where you're constantly working and checking email until late at night. 9 to 5 doesn't have to be your standard, but the whole point here is you want to be able to make a clean break from working to being at home. This is the big trap a lot of people fall into, is they don't make a clean break when work time is over and at home time is starting. Typically, we have a commute that allows us to make that mental transition. We're going from work time to maybe hanging out with coworkers time to then being at home time. When you're working from the same place that you watch TV and make dinner, having that clean break has to be much more aggressive because it happens instantly. So really be clear, when a laptop is done, when we close it, don't then pick it up 15 minutes later because you thought, oh, there's one last thing I have to do. This is a hard habit to build, but you have to be active and set this as a goal. Along with that, observe your habits, especially at the beginning. At the end of the day, it's important to reflect not only on, goals and things you got done, but how well did I do with my working from home habits? A framework I think is really helpful is what I'll call keep, toss, create. Keep is, what did I do well today that I want to build into my habits? Toss, what did I not do well? Did I get distracted? Did I spend a lot of time scrolling through Instagram? What do I want to make sure I get rid of? And also create. So what is a new thing, a new habit, a new behavior, a new tool I want to add for tomorrow or the next day? And be clear with that. So set those goals for the next day. What small thing am I going to change about my habits that I reflected on? And celebrate small successes, right? That's where that dance party comes in, right? That's where the, having a nice moment to take a 10-minute break and go for a walk. You are now much more responsible for celebrating those small wins because there's fewer people around you to kind of chat with and high five. So you have to come up with some habit for that, whether it's virtual or whether it's with yourself. And the last things I'll leave you with are embrace this uncertainty. You're going to have to give up some of the need to control because a lot of this is out of our hands. Easier said than done. But once you give up the idea that you can make sure everything is perfect, you're going to be a whole lot better at reading and reacting. There's a whole other conversation we can have around change management, but try to let go of some of that need of control because you can't, to be totally honest with you. And try to leave the house at least once a day. Really important. There are days where I'm leaving the house for the first time at 5. That's not great. That's not a good behavior. I'm going to be honest with you. That's something that I would toss at my keep, toss, create. So build that into your habits. Go walk around the block. Go do something outside. Really, really important. It'll keep you sane and have fun, right? It's going to be interesting. You're going to enjoy a lot of these aspects. Remind yourself that this is kind of a interesting opportunity to take back more control over your working life. Okay, so that's it. Again, a quick recap. We're understanding about, how to set habits. We started there about setting up our home workstation. We talked about effectively using virtual tools. And we talked about best practices for maintaining focus, right? Making that clean break, setting work-life boundaries, having the right mindset. We're now to the Q&A portion. So I'm going to jump in and answer some of these questions. I see a lot of good stuff. First question I saw coming from Instagram was, will this be recorded? Yes. So we're going to share this video on all the Oak and Reed's social channels. So if you want to review this or if you want to share it with your coworkers, you'll have that opportunity. Don't worry about that. So let's go to the questions on Zoom. From Cassie. Hi, Cassie. Curious about your thoughts on working remotely when your main job function is planning in-person events. What are your recommendations for turning those virtual? That's a great question. So virtual events, in-person events obviously have a ton of benefits, right? So if we're going to turn a large in-person event into a virtual one, what I think is going to help is building out interactivity. Like if we're going to turn it into a webinar, have things like polls, have things like breakout groups if you can, if it's not too big of a group. Have things where people actually get a chance to talk to other people. Just like in a networking event, you gather in groups of 2 to 3 to have small chit chat. Find ways to formally create those small chit chat opportunities through breakout rooms, through exercises, through polling, through an online resource. That's going to help replace some of that. Can't replace all of it, obviously, but I do think those are good. I built out some polls for today, but then I totally forgot to use them. So that's on me, but I was going to try to do that with more polling. That's one example. In fact, hey, why don't I do that right now? I'm actually curious, while we're doing questions, how many days will you work from home this week? So answer that while we're going. All right, we have another question here. Let me quickly read this. Yeah, so Julie has a question. Sadiq here. How do I communicate what I'm working on so my manager and I both don't have to worry about micromanaging? This is a good one. So I don't know how you communicate what you're working on right now. If it's working well, obviously stick to that. For me, I like something like a Trello board, some folks like to use Asana, like a project management tool. Even if it's super simple, you make those boards visible so everyone has visibility into priorities and work products. That way they can check that without having to Slack you or ping you. It doesn't have to be that. It can be a Google Doc, but having some shared resource that's a single source of truth around priorities and agreeing on that. There's a lot of tools out there. I love Trello for that. So that'd be my suggestion. Julie is concerned about, I'm gonna do this here. Julie's concerned about missing out on planning, sharing, discussion among staff that happens usually casually in person. Yeah, I'm concerned about that too. I think that's actually the casual, informal communication is probably, in person is highly efficient and useful, and that's where new ideas come from. You're gonna have to formalize some of that. So it may be scheduling a virtual call to have just a brainstorm or to have like a coffee meeting, right? You can have, hey, we'll call this our coffee meeting. Everyone make coffee at home, bring it, let's chat. You're going to have to formalize a lot of those things and put them on calendars to come close to recreating the casual socialization. Julie's also excited for working with fewer interruptions. I didn't mention that, but working from home, people talk about being distracted. I actually believe it is the best place to do focused work. You can turn off all of the interruptions, the pings, the Slacks, the bings, and you can actually write or think without someone coming to you or without some other external interruption. So that's a huge benefit that we want to make sure that we're capturing and maximizing. Let's go to Instagram. I don't see any questions there. Okay. We see from Katrina, she's talking about socialization. We had an extra 15 to 30 minutes to our meetings for extra convos. If we don't need it, no worries, but allows us to use the time in case. Yeah, adding bonus time to meetings, again, to kind of Julie's question, is a great way to formalize the informal conversations when you're not in the same place. Quick look at the poll. Wow. Okay. This is kind of, wow. Poll. I'm going to share the results of the poll. You can see close to 60% of people this week will be working from home 5 days a week. I would be shocked if that number isn't wildly different from a month ago, right? The vast majority of people are fully permanently remote, which makes sense. That's why we're on this webinar. But that is intense, right? So again, going back to the setting up having a permanent work from home mindset, no couch, no TV, no bed, email, that kind of stuff. Okay, we have from Anonymous, how do you balance focus time and responsiveness? That's a big question, Anonymous. um, the way I do it is I block out times for being distracted, and I block out times when I'm not distracted. What I mean by that is I actually block out email times. Right? I'm going to check email 3 times a day. I'm not going to have alerts up. I'm going to block out 2 hours to write out a new workshop like I did yesterday for this webinar. Again, depending on your role, like I'm not in a customer service role. So that is going to be a lot easier for me to do than it is for someone who has to respond to things all the time. So I think coming up with SLAs, service level agreements with your customers, internal and external, especially internal, about response times and sticking to those SLAs is kind of the only way to really get better at that. All right, Ryan. Hey, Ryan. Very insightful. Thanks for putting on. You're welcome. Partner and I are both work from home for the outbreak. 2 rooms, 2 Zooms, 1 bedroom. Ouch. Hopefully this is short term, but any tips? Well, congratulations on starting your own co-working space. That's basically where you're at right now. That's a good question. So I would say you kind of want to think about turning your whole apartment into a series of different work zones. So just like when I was working in workplace strategy, we would, even if it was an open office and people could sit wherever they wanted on any given day, we'd have a designated zone. This is the library zone, right? This is where no talking. This is heads down work time. This is the talking zone. This is the take phone calls. This is the video call zone. You can be a little louder. I think it's really important maybe to talk with your partner about like, where do we take our calls from? Maybe we start taking our video calls from the bathroom. I don't know, or phone calls, maybe not the video calls. It's a little strange, but places where you actually need to close a door. That's a place where maybe you set up a desk in there. I'm just being creative here. But you can also potentially both be on calls at the same time in a loud zone. So you may have to share some calendars as well and kind of put your heads together at the beginning of the day. Like, hey, I'm on calls from 2 to 3. What are you doing at that time? Maybe that's time for your break or whatever that is. It's going to be a little extra communication there. Okay, we have Bailey Douglas. Hey, how's it going? I'd love to learn how to be a more effective remote presenter. I did my first couple remote presentations to the company and they were awkward. I want to improve. That's a great question. I think one thing that helps is have a strategy and a pattern for how you set up your monitors. So I kind of have a system of where I put the slides, where I put the attendee list, where I put the videos, and I keep it consistent each time. So that way I kind of know where to look for different types of things. So I can, for me, I have the slides on my laptop. I've got the videos, the polls, the chats, the participants on my external monitor. So I'm always kind of checking the same places, and I kind of get into this habit of like, okay, let me check the chat. It's in the upper right. Let me look at the slides. That's down here. That's one way to kind of just manage your windows and keep that organized, because I think that can get people a little flustered sometimes. 2 is always like, make sure you're looking at the people, not yourself. I find I often do that all the time. I mentioned that earlier. So catch yourself when you're doing that. And 3rd, I mean, it is kind of awkward. So acknowledging that can, to a degree, can be helpful. Like if you mess up, you get your slides mixed up, you know, just laugh it off. Take a, I always call it the failure bow, like acknowledge the mistake, laugh at it, and move on. I would also say try to keep the content of your slides close to where your camera is, so your eyes make it look like you're looking at people and you're not all over the place. That just makes it feel a little more natural. And you may want to try standing. That often helps. Like I think standing when I do presentation courses is always a more effective way. I'm sitting right now because I want all the monitors, but if you don't need to monitor all this stuff for a webinar, try doing it standing, right? You can like stack up your laptop on a bunch of books and stand and kind of be more physical. That may make it feel more like you are in an in-person setting. Quick look at this webinar chat. John, hi John Cacciarani. Um, Thoughts on how to handle team members that are working in office and clients who might be expecting you to be in office? Huh. Well, I mean, if they're expecting you to be in office and you're not, I think there's got to be some sort of communication to clients that might have to be company wide to kind of set an expectation there. But if there are sort of a mix of the in-person in the office and virtual, again, that goes back to it's really, really important to do those Zoom best practices like names, put everyone on video, make sure you're actively reaching out to the people who are virtual and encouraging them. Um, and then also make sure that you set expectations around like roles in the meeting, like who's facilitating, who's not, because that can get often a little confusing within meetings. But if you're give a little more specific about what it is you need to handle there, I think we can probably come up with some more strategies too. Okay, we answered from Sadiq. Okay. Well, I think that's about it. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming today, for jumping on kind of at the last minute. I know things are a little hectic right now, so I appreciate you taking the time. We're just at an hour right now, which is kind of perfect timing. Just to wrap things up, again, at Oak and Reads, we do virtual trainings. This is what we do. This is our expertise. So if you're stuck at home and you want to continue working on your personal and professional development, we are prepared to deliver virtual webinars and workshops on a variety of communication topics, much like today. So check out our website and reach out if you'd like to talk more. Again, my name is Dave Collins. My email is dave@oakandreads.com. I'll be sharing video of today's session, so feel free to share it with your teams and with colleagues. And again, reach out if you have questions about virtual working, if you want to talk about a workshop, or if you're just curious about any other types of communication or collaboration questions. The inbox is open, and I love chatting about this stuff. So again, thank you to everyone. And hopefully I'll see you on the next webinar. We'll be doing some more of these in the future. So stay tuned to your email, and good luck with your working from home.